Hey, everybody. It's Dr. Sally here, and this is Hope Illuminated. It's a podcast where we share powerful stories and science and well-being strategies. Here, isolation and despair can be defeated and a passion for living rekindled. No flashlight required for our journey, just fired up listeners ready to gain guidance from our international experts. Today, we have a fascinating conversation from one of my long-term partners in the world of suicide postvention. You've heard me talk about postvention before. It's what we do in the aftermath of a suicide death to help people with their suicide grief and trauma experiences on the individual level, on a family level, on a community level, and so on. And our guest today is going to talk about a very specific project that started in military communities and now is spreading nationwide. And welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor and I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, it's going to be great. It's a fascinating project that you got going on called the Black Box Project, and it's
Mhm.
really looking at our digital lives after someone has died by suicide to try to understand patterns and clues that can help us with prevention. And so we're going to dig into that. Um, but first, let's talk a little bit about who you are and what you do every day. Tim Bartlett and I actually have crossed paths probably, well, let's see if your brother died in 2010. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably shortly thereafter. Carson died in 2004, actually 21 years ago this week.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
seems like a long time and also like yesterday. I had a dream about him actually, Kim, the other night. I did. It's been a long time since I had a dream, and I
Oh,
actually woke myself up laughing.
I'm
Uh-huh.
kind of jealous.
I know. It was a beautiful dream because he was doing something goofy like he usually would do. And I just was hilariously laughing and I woke myself up. So
Oh my
anyway,
gosh.
right, I do feel like they continue to walk with us in so many ways. But we're fellow sisters on a mission, never wanted to be part of this club, but we do find
hmm
ourselves in this space trying to figure out some gap filling things. And of course, partnering in AAS and
hmm
American Association of Suicidology and your work with TAPS, the military version of suicide postvention support and the Suicide Prevention Resource Center, all of these incredible large organizations that where our paths just continue to
hmm
wander out and reconnect with each other. So I'm so grateful to be able to do this conversation with you.
mm
Share a little bit about both kind of what you do every day, but also the story that got you to be so passionate about this moment.
Yeah, so as I'm sure you can relate, Sally, the before and the after, right? The
Mhm.
before had nothing to do with any of this, right? And,
Mhm.
before my brother died in 2010, and John was my only sibling. He was
Mhm.
younger than me, almost
Mhm.
by 11 years. And when he died, for us, it was a relatively out of the blue. John's story was not one of, years of struggle, at least that we knew of, or, previous attempts. But when he died at home. He was living with my parents at the time, and we like I said, we had no point of reference for this. We hadn't really had anyone in our family that had been impacted by this, or in any way that I think that we felt like I don't know what would equip you for this, but we just felt so ill-equipped when it
Mhm.
happened, right? I was living in Massachusetts at the time. You may hear the accent a little bit, but I live in southern New Hampshire now. But in Massachusetts, they're fairly resource rich in terms of support for postvention, although we clearly didn't know that word then, right?
Mhm.
We were connected to support pretty early on, and it was peer-based support. We were connected and we were able, my parents went to one, I went to another one that was closer to my home, but we went to suicide specific support groups. And that changed everything for
Mhm.
me. And I know it was a lifeline for my parents too. That validation and that affirmation of you are not alone and you are not the only one having these thoughts that seem so foreign and so crazy and these experiences that you just don't have reference for. I had grieved other people in my life, my grandmother, and but nothing like this.
Mhm.
Very shortly, and by that I say probably 6 or 8 weeks after John died, I just had this sense that I'm gonna do something with this.
Mhm.
This being suicide, I did not know what the thing was that I would be doing. My bachelor's at the time, I had my bachelor's. My kids were little, so I was kind of doing a couple different part-time jobs, consulting a little bit, and but my bachelor's was in marketing and communications. nothing, related to this at all. But I just felt I'm going to do something with this. And I was able to, the organization that we received some support from, they were hiring for a part-time trainer to go around the state and train gatekeepers of older adults, because at the time that was the highest suicide rate. So this, the state had
Mhm.
developed a training, and I had no experience, but I got the job. And that was really, my first step into this work in this field. And it was great because it was in the prevention world, but I didn't have to tell my story. It wasn't too close to home. And as I did that work more and more, I knew that I was being led to work with loss survivors. My heart, clearly I believe in prevention. We'll talk more about, where that connects with the work that I do now. But I just always felt led to supporting those impacted by this loss, because I think, we were so well supported. We were so well connected to support early on, and it made such a difference for us. So I started volunteering in my community for some local, fundraising walks, and that led to me working for TAPS. You mentioned that I worked for TAPS for almost nine and almost 10 years, and I worked specifically with the suicide postvention team. So all of the, military and veteran families impacted by suicide, those are the ones that we served. And I was able to sort of marry my previous career, marketing events, with supporting our suicide loss survivors. And it was wonderful. And I learned so much. I mean, being able to work with so many families over the years. I'm an expert in my own grief. That's about it, right? Nobody else's. And just learning all of the different, just the ways that families, are impacted by this, and just the long-term ripple effects, and being able to walk alongside someone when it is the most intimate moment of their lives. I mean, it just feels like their house is aflame, and just such a privilege to come alongside them, not with answers, right? I wish I had answers, right? If there was a book or a manual, I think I actually asked in the very beginning. I was like, okay, so what do I do? I did this. I go to the group. I go, now what do I do? Like if there's if there was a checklist that someone was holding out on me, I thought. But to be able to just share with others, to give them a space, to create a space to grieve this, and in all the ways that grief touches us, and all the ways that loss impacts our lives, to be able to create a space for people to do that and support each other. And that was really the magic of what I got to do at TAPS, which was incredible. That led to, in a sort of a roundabout way, as life often can happen, but to the project that I'm working on now. And as I mentioned, the majority of my work and my focus, and sort of where I felt being led, was in postvention. I knew that, good postvention care for someone, a family impacted by this, anyone grieving a suicide loss, is preventative in nature because of our own, increased risk after this exposure. So I knew that postvention was incredibly important. It was more than just giving people, a place to sort of speak about it, although that was incredibly, I think, an important piece of it. But the work that I'm doing now, I was just under 3 years ago, I should say, I was recruited to work for a different national nonprofit called Stop Soldier Suicide. And on one side of the house, this is not really the side that I work on, but on one side of the house, we provide clinical treatment, telemental health care to active duty and veterans. If you have ever worn a U.S. military uniform, you are, able to engage in our services. If we happen to not cover the state that you live in, we're not in every single state in the country, but most, we do connect you to other local supports. But it's free, it's confidential, which is incredibly important for our active duty folks, because
Mhm.
command is never going to find out that you're receiving care unless you want to let them, unless you tell them, unless you share that with them. And the same for, your VA or any of your other, medical team or caregivers. This is private. This is, it's telemental health care that you get to engage in. And our clinicians, our team of clinicians are phenomenal. They come to us licensed, and we extensively train them, and they are trained in suicide specific care, suicide specific modalities.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because, although we will walk with someone, and if they need care long term, we're absolutely there, and we do wrap around, and help connect them to resources if they're experiencing homelessness or food insecurity. But the majority of our folks are with us less than 12 sessions, because we get, it's those acute folks, the ones that are pretty moderately to high risk, and we get right in there. And it's our results are amazing. But Stop Soldier Suicide is almost run like uh, feels like a startup almost, right? Sort
Mhm.
of, more so than a nonprofit. And that mindset, I think, is what opened up the idea to create the Black Box Project, which is what I get to work on now. So,
Want to make a comment about the
yeah,
other side of the house because that's a phenomenal thing that has been developed there, and it's goroger.org if they want to get there
yes,
directly.
yes, yes,
Goroger.org, and the fact that you have suicide specifically trained clinicians, that it's free and confidential and keeps everybody safe, and
yes.
telemental health across states with different licensure things. Like it is
Uh-huh.
incredible that you have all created that.
And it's interesting. I'm so glad that you brought up the goroger.org site because so Stop Soldier Suicide was founded 15 years ago by three Army vets, hence the name. But when they came home from their deployments, they were losing battle buddies, to suicide at far too frequently. And they
Mhm.
just got sick of it. And that's why they started the organization. But over the years, that name, Stop Soldier Suicide, has, for some, it's like marching orders. Yes, stop soldier suicide. That's what we're going to do. For others, and in particular, maybe those who are seeking care or maybe thinking about the idea of engaging to get some care, it can be a barrier, right? It can be a hard thing to swallow. So a couple years ago, we did some market research and did some focus groups, and so that we call that our wellness center, but it's branded as Roger. So that's why the website you can get to it through stopsoldiersuicide.org,
Mhm.
but the website itself too is goroger.org, and that is because Roger is that's a universally understood term in the military culture and military language. Roger is just a very positive, affirmation. Roger, yep, got it. To engage with Go Roger is just less of a barrier to entry. So, but it's the same exact care. It's the same, it's the same everything. Just a little bit under a different name that might be easier for some folks to engage in. So, thank you
Awesome.
for bringing that up.
Yes. Well, I love it. And that's probably a whole nother podcast. Some other day we'll dive into that in a deep way. But let's talk about the Black Box Project because this is a phenomenal aspect of the massive puzzle that we're trying to pull together here to understand and help. And there, you just came out with a white paper. So talk a
We
little bit
did.
about how it works.
Yeah,
What are the complications? What are you finding? Like, wherever you want to
sure.
start, just dive in.
Yeah. I'll talk about what it is. And it's easiest to explain, I think, the context of aviation, right? We understand what a black box is in aviation. A black box in an airplane, when an accident occurs, it's there to tell us what was happening, right? In the seconds, the minutes, the hours, the days, maybe even the weeks and months and longer before that accident happened. And we collect that data to use so it doesn't happen again, right? What can we learn from this to prevent that particular accident or that malfunction or whatever was going on from happening again in another aircraft? Same exact concept, only here the black box are digital devices. So people's digital devices, either their cell phone, their laptop, or their tablet. And what we are doing, and again, I haven't been around since the beginning of this project. It's about 4.5 years old, so it was in place before I came over here. But we are borrowing digital devices from families who have lost a loved one to suicide. And if they still have their loved ones' devices, whether or not they are working, charged up, on a plan, or still functioning or not, it doesn't matter. We borrow those devices from the family and we copy the data that lives on them. We do not connect them to the internet. We're not logging into apps or logging into people's banking apps or anything like that.
Mm.
But we copy the data that lives on them, and far more gets saved on a smartphone, for example, than I never knew. But what we do is once we've copied that data, we immediately depersonalize and de-identify that. And, anything that could be identified or, is a proper name or, is reference to a person or looks like it could be a string of numbers that could be a bank account number or a social security number, or all of that gets redacted automatically. And then that data that we have copied and de-identified is pooled with all the other data that we have collected thus far. That lake, that data lake, is then analyzed. And what we're doing is we're looking for behavioral trends and patterns in that data so that we can, have this data set that says X amount, majority percentage, whatever it might be, did X, Y, and Z in the month before they died. What can we do with that? When we know that data, that statistically significant data, how do we build interventions around that? How does that inform what our Roger clinicians do? How does that inform what app developers do? How can that inform, every other industry that touches people via digital behavior, right? And where can interventions be built? So, so they don't get to that crisis point. So, that's sort of the Cliff Notes version of the project. But we've worked with, at this point, I believe the last number was just up over 140 families have loaned us well over 225 devices. Many families will loan us 2 or 3 devices that belonged to their person. And I'm the one, that's what I get to do. I get to engage with the families. And, I think it's very helpful. It's not about me. It's not about my story. My brother had a flip phone in 2010, so that would not have helped here. But, the fact, I think I do share that I'm a loss survivor, and I think it's helpful to talk to a family when they know that they're talking with someone who kind of understands this. I mean, all the details are not the same, but I do understand a little bit about what their experience in, grief after suicide loss has been like. I also will always share resources because, I'm a social worker, so it's what I do, but I think it's incredibly helpful, to be able to share those grief resources too, because this is a part of the process of grieving and integrating that grief for so many of our families. Our families who choose to participate in this with us, they'll share like, it was just incredibly healing to know that my person's data is going to make a difference. It's going to add to something. It's going to contribute to something that is designed and potentially going to save future lives.
Okay.
It gives them meaning and purpose. And I think that's something that us suicide loss survivors, we search for that. And I think, we intentionally seek to make meaning out of this because it can feel so purposeless, right?
Right.
Um,
And for you to be the liaison also, um, like you said, the trustworthy bridge
yeah.
matters so much because you can appreciate how precious these
Oh
things
my
are
gosh.
and how the last finger touches of this
Hmm.
person's life probably hit these devices in multiple
Right.
ways. Again, Carson died a long time before many of these things were developed, but I remember, you know, his voicemail. I would
Hmm.
call it multiple times just to
Yeah.
hear his voice again, like these little digital and electronic fingerprints of this person's life mean a lot. And so to you
Yeah.
to be that liaison, they know that this
Yeah.
is not just data. This is
It's a
part of this
big
person's life,
ask.
and that you will be treating it preciously.
Yes, we
So.
we know the weight of this ask, right? We
Mhm.
know that and it's an incredibly courageous thing to loan us this device. What I think that, what I always will share with families, and it's really interesting. Some grieving families, families bereaved by suicide, sometimes they, given my years of working with families, when I first started, they were like, okay, so what's like the perfect, is there a sweet spot? Is there a right time to make this type of ask to someone, a
Mhm.
family? When is the right time? Is it a year after the loss? Is it 2 years? Um, I probably would have made a guess then. Now I wouldn't even attempt it because every family is truly different. Some from the get-go, they're like, yes, please, I want his death, I want her death to contribute to this. I want it to matter. Take their device. Let this make a difference. And others, I've, been in contact with families for a year and a half, and they'll tell me, I'm not ready. I fully support this. I get it. I know what you're doing and I support it and I see the need. I'm not ready. And then I'll get a call 8, 9 months later and they'll say, we're ready. We're ready now.
Mhm. Oh, I
it
just
really,
remembered another important part of your this
yeah,
piece I wanted to clarify out of the gate. This is also you not doing a psychological autopsy on the person. And you make that very clear in the beginning. Like, we're not going to
yes.
come back and tell you, here's their last 48 hours and why we think they killed
No,
themselves.
and
That's
we
not the
don't.
point of this.
Right, right. And I don't think ethically, Sally, we could
Right?
ever really do that, right? Could
Right.
we ever look at someone's, because, okay, so their digital data, their digital behavior before someone dies, does that hold a lot of, we think, obviously, that it holds a ton of learning and a ton of, opportunity for us to understand better. However, it's one puzzle piece of that person, right? It's one piece of their entire story. It would never tell the whole story. So we could never just look at that one piece and say, oh, this is what happened. This is why, how things progressed, and this is what brought them. So we would never do that.
But also
And
the
I am,
complexity of the person who's deceased.
yes,
They
absolutely.
might
There's
have
no,
had things going on in their life that the family had no idea about and nor
Mhm.
should at this stage. Like
Right,
the
right.
protection, the confidentiality of the person.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we can't really divulge, we don't, and also to your point, the purpose of this project is in, add that aggregate data, that, that pool, and looking at, the majority of folks who have died by suicide did this, or this percentage did this, not necessarily finding out why, in one digital, one device, what happened for that individual person. We do, we of course get that question. People say, well, do you give us a report? Do you print anything out? And we don't, because we really don't analyze it that way, right? It's pooled to look at that, that larger lake. What one question that we often get is, when devices are locked, and as a survivor, I totally get that a family would want, to have access to a locked device if they've never had access before. The answer to, can you unlock locked devices? The answer is usually. We do have the same software. It was donated to us, but the same software that government agencies use. If you follow any like high profile court case that has to do with any cell phone data, you'll hear words like cell bright and brute force. We have the same softwares. They are not an exact science, though. It's never, I am explicitly clear. If you're willing to loan us a locked device, we are willing to try. We will, give it our absolute best, but it's not a guarantee. And even if we are able to unlock a device, sometimes families don't want them back unlocked. It's interesting. And some, if they do, I will always spend a little bit of extra time with them and say, I don't know what's in there. I don't know your loved one's story. I don't, but I know lots of family stories. And sometimes we can find something out after the fact that it doesn't change what happened. It doesn't change our love for them. It doesn't change how we miss them. It can just change things a little bit for you now. It can impact your grief a little bit now, that you may learn something that you didn't know before. And it might not be a helpful thing,
Yes. I mean,
or,
I can't remember who wrote about it, but talked about we have a public life, we have a private life, and we have a shadow life. I'm not sure shadow is the right word, but like a life that we don't share with anybody.
right,
And it could
right.
just be in our head, it could be, in things we do, but like everybody's got those three levels. And
Yeah,
sometimes you find something out about the shadow part of the life. They're like, whoa, I didn't know they did that at all. And now
right.
that makes me think about them differently. And I'm not sure that's always helpful
Right,
given
right,
what they're
right.
having.
Yet
Mhm.
some of that private behavior, right? And if you think about behavior that's just between me and my phone, right? That
Mhm.
truly is private, and that's a first person, right? Like
Mhm.
it's not, that is incredibly beneficial to this project, because that's where we, that's where we, that a lot of the findings showed that's where we can, interventions can be built. That's what was highlighted was, when things are, we know that people who are struggling, many of them, they are really good at hiding it from us,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, so in that, first person behavior with your device, maybe there's, there's that behavior that is just between you and your phone, but it's showing elevated risk based
Yeah.
on, previous black box data. How can we build things to help that person? How could we build something that that person could be engaged in and help build so that when they are at risk, they know that they've got a safety net built in. There's so many different things that can be built.
Awesome.
It's
We're going to dive into
fascinating.
the data
Yeah.
because you have found patterns, which are fascinating. But before
Hmm.
we get there, I just wanted one more clarifying question. This started out as a military project or veterans and
Yeah,
active
well,
duty?
simply because of who Stop
Hmm.
Soldier Suicide serves,
Right,
military and veterans. This
but now
started, we were
broader.
working with just military families, but we had the beginning of this year, we expanded it. So for almost an entire year now, we have been working with and seeking to borrow devices from any family, military, not military, doesn't matter. Any family that has lost a loved one to suicide, we would love to be able to include in this project.
And are you coding in the lake, military versus not military?
Yeah, so we do collect some information, and then there's some that we will send out. That we have a survey that we send out to families later. That's optional if they want to provide us more information about their person and some of those specifics. But yeah, we can kind of sort of identify stuff on the back end of the data, right?
Okay,
And so and filter it in a bunch of different ways. So it's easy for us to do that. So
awesome. All right, well, let's dive into the white papers
yeah,
report and the findings. A lot of very, very helpful, insightful things that have come up in the
yes,
digital life that, again, inform us on the prevention side. Let's talk about something that we probably all expect is true for most of us, but that the digital life and the external life have sometimes a stark disconnect. The private life and the public life digitally have a stark disconnect, and that people can look fine in their public
hmm.
life, but then what's also going on tells a much different story. Talk a little bit about that finding.
Yeah, so we were looking at communication, as you can
Mhm.
imagine. So the ways that you can communicate externally with the world, whoever that might be, via your digital device, and we'll use cell phones as an example. So you can text, right? You can email, but you can send a message in Facebook. Instagram, Snapchat, WhatsApp, I mean, there's so many different ways. And to be able to wrangle all of that together was a data analysis beast, but we have some really big brain data scientists working on it. But in looking at that communication and looking at that behavior, in as far as I think up to a year before death, that external, we sort of coined that the external persona. And so that external persona looked relatively stable, right? Over that year. Behavior didn't vary too much, while at the very same time, the internal persona, so that's maybe behavior that's just between me and my phone, right? The things that I'm searching, the things that I'm saving, what I'm putting, where I'm going, right? My
Mhm.
geolocation, what I'm putting in my notes app, right? Maybe what I'm putting in my calendar. If I'm, tasks or reminders or that kind of thing. That internal persona, while external was looking pretty stable, that internal persona showed signs of risk. Things like maybe they were researching methods. Maybe they were researching, life insurance information. If someone dies by suicide, what happens to life insurance? They also, and this was really interesting and really, really hopeful, they were also looking at crisis resources and mental health resources and faith resources. So, that sort of cyclical, behavior, looking at crisis, looking like when they're in crisis and then looking for help, right? That
Mhm.
I think illuminated places where interventions can
Mhm.
be effective, right? We sort of in the field know that there's some ambiguity when people are, struggling with suicidality. Maybe they, attempt survivors share with us. I still, there was a piece of me that wanted to die, but there was a piece of me that still wanted to live. And I think this shows, even in our digital behavior, there's that ambiguity, right? That I might be looking at how I want to die, but I'm also looking at how I can live and where I can get some support around that. That's where interventions could be deployed, right? That's where we
Mhm.
could create, I
In
often
the book.
joke, I was going to say, sorry. I often say, my Apple Watch knows when I fall down the stairs, right? And it can call help for me. There's got to be ways that we can build that, that we can get help for people when when their behavior is on their device is showing increased risk.
Yes, and the point about life insurance also informs us who do we need to bring into the circle of helpers, because that life insurance
Yes.
thing actually is a huge thing. My brother was in the insurance industry but didn't get life insurance until uh, May, and he died in December. And you can do
Oh,
the math, right? So
yeah.
we at the time were like, oh, he's father of a baby, he's just doing stuff for his family, and then clearly things went a different way over the next several months. But he didn't have the digital life, but we did see a note in his daytimer, just hang on. He was trying to hang on
Wow.
for the
Yeah.
clause to expire.
Wow.
So the insurance person needs to be
Hmm.
brought into this
Yes.
conversation, and really the financial people much more so, and the divorce lawyers and like all these other
Yes,
people that
yes.
in the moment of the crisis,
Self-storage
self-storage.
facilities,
Right,
right? You
right.
think about that. You think about, there's pawn shops, maybe,
Yeah.
like there, when people are struggling in other ways, they may, or maybe are struggling financially and they don't have a
Well,
place to
that's one
live,
thing
or
that came
they're,
out, right?
like,
Financial distress was one of the
yes,
findings. Talk a little bit
yes.
about that.
So this first chunk of data that most of these findings were based on is from our military and veteran families. So most of these people either were active duty or had served. This chunk of data that we were looking at, and there was a lot of searches and engaging with USAA. Right, looking at I think all of the different things, what USAA does, loans, right, short-term quick loans, that like all all of that is indicative of stress and struggle that we know, right? Maybe that's not, a brand new thought in the field, but what might be brand new is, maybe within the USAA app, there's room to build some prevention messaging. Maybe I don't know that we've thought of it that way, that these are folks that can really become partners in prevention in very actionable ways. And I think, as time goes on and we're able to analyze more and more data, I think there's going to be more of that. Like I said, you think about, self-storage and, like you said, insurance. I mean, there are places that people are engaging with as they are either excuse me, kind of working towards the thought of their death, or trying to stay alive, right? There are places that they're going, there are services they're seeking there, and those are places that I think digitally, when we have that proof, we can now create those interventions, that we know that we can get to them because of this. So
Right. I wanted to call out one more finding that I thought was really
yeah,
fascinating, that also informs prevention, and that was the late night activity. We're all aware that insomnia, is
right.
common for people who are struggling with their mental health, but the device activity late night. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I want to be clear, this hasn't been built yet, and I don't know that SSS would be the ones to build it, that
Mhm.
Stop Soldier Suicide would build it. This is sort of in my fantasy world, but I think it's a very real possibility. So say I am a clinician and I engage with my client. This is maybe 5 years from now, maybe, I don't know. There's an app and he agrees, he or she agrees. This is how we engage with each other. This is how we support each other. And he knows that this app is going to not monitor maybe what he's doing on his phone, but that his phone is active, right? That's all we might need to know, that the phone is active as opposed to asleep, right? I come in this morning, it's Monday after the holiday weekend, and I see that my client, Mr. Smith, his phone has been active from midnight to 6 a.m. for the last 4 nights in a row.
Mhm.
And I know him. I know he doesn't work the night shift. He's not sleeping. Maybe I don't have an appointment with him on the books until next Friday. I'm not going to wait till then because I know that lack of
Mhm.
sleep is a very high risk indicator. So I'm going to reach out to him now. To me, that's a simple way to using that information in a real world. Like, okay, if I know he's not sleeping. I don't need to know what he was doing.
Right.
That I'm not going to, I don't need to sort of infringe on his privacy, but just that he was doing, that shows me he's not sleeping. That shows me that there's something else going on there. And I want to get to him now. I don't want to wait. So
Yeah.
that's
Well, and the
one.
very specific, again, the large data pool, very specific inflection at the 10 weeks before death is also very
Yes.
telling. And I don't know about what you know about your brother's last days, but my brother's last days, the last 2 weeks of his life, he was super agitated, like
Mm,
lots of pacing, not
yep.
sleeping,
Yep.
lots of, physical tremor. He wasn't on his phone all night because that wasn't a thing that we did back then, but
Right.
but that is a very telling thing. And I call it, the extreme battle of life and death is happening
Yes.
right there. Am I going
Yep.
to live or am I not going to live? Am I going to live or not going to live? And the body is
Yep.
revved up like they're facing the saber-toothed tiger, except you're the saber-toothed tiger. So the behavioral activity on the phone just makes complete sense to me about
Yep.
why that's just kind of coming to a head there as well.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Yep.
So
Yep.
let's talk a little bit about what you're hoping our audience might be able to do to support this project, learn from it, contribute to it. This just seems like such a rich place where people can get involved in many different ways. So,
Yeah, thank you for that. So first and foremost, for anyone who is watching and listening, if you are bereaved by suicide loss in your family, this is something that you can choose to participate in. And my ask would be just an opportunity to explore it with you. A conversation, or I always offer a Zoom because sometimes it's nice to see a face, behind a project or behind a website, where, we can just explore it and let's talk about it. Does it feel right for you? Does it something, that you would want to participate in? The logistics of it, we cover all the costs of shipping. Our digital forensics lab is in Raleigh, North Carolina. We cover all that. I make sure you are as informed as possible every step of the way. And depending on the how busy the lab is, and depending on the individual device, is how long it'll take. But I'll probably always under promise and over deliver in terms of that. It will tell you we might need it 6 months and we might get it back to you in 2 months. So, but we go over all of that. And, I will talk to as many family members that want to be involved in the decision and share as much as I can. And that would be my ask. Like I said, explore it, because we do need to grow this project. The more data we have, the stronger the significance, the more that, we are not keeping this data to ourselves, by the way. We want to share this with the field. We want researchers, research teams out there. If you're involved in the research world, please reach out to us, because we want to be able to build this and offer this data in a way that is going to support your efforts. We don't want this to be siloed in the world of suicide prevention. So that would be my ask. Like I said, reach out if you are a family and would be interested in considering this. And it's sort of a living legacy to your loved one, and we really do consider it that. We have just such respect and admiration for the families that choose to do this with us. We consider them partners, and they're architects in prevention with us. They're helping us build this new way, and a new way to save people's lives. Like I said, other resource organizations or other sort of tech companies, we'd love to engage. And if we can improve upon this project, if we can share it, if we can, that's what we want to do. We want to grow it as much as we can. So we're open. This is the very beginning. We know this is a long-term thing. We're in it for the long haul, but we know it has incredible potential. So.
awesome. I'm just going to go back and do a quick recap, and then I'm going to come
Yeah.
back to you for final thoughts and how
Okay.
people can get in touch with you and all that good stuff. So if you're just tuning in or picking up where you left off, I'm here with Kim Burdett Bartlett, and we
Mhm.
are talking about this black box project. And actually hearing your story again, I've heard bits and pieces along the way, so many parallel lines here. I
Mhm.
also is in a state that had lots of grief support after suicide, and I would agree that that support group made a huge difference for me. And also my parents went with me at the beginning, and my mom stayed on for like 12 years. I
Oh,
mean, she ended
wow.
up being a mentor,
Mm.
but it was a lifeline in many ways. It was like a place to regroup every time we got together.
Yeah.
I also remember that call-in moment, the aha, like somebody needs to do something about this. Oh, I need to do something about this. Oh, it's
Yeah. Oh,
me.
it's
Oh.
me.
And then starting off with the gatekeeper training, because that's what you find when you go out there and look at the
Yeah.
beginning.
Yep.
And then having a big heart for this lost survivor work. And just your pathway through a lot of different places, informing all of that backstory to where you are today, with so much innovation in gap filling work on the prevention side of the telemental health services, and this incredible opportunity that we have. I'm forgetting his name because that's what I do when I'm my age, but oh, you probably know him and work with him a ton. Anyway, very smart man, veteran, very much in the works of this. And he talks all the time. He says it's the big data science that is going to get us to this
Yeah.
place where we can do a
Yep.
much better job tailoring our interventions,
Yep.
figuring out how to stratify who's more at risk than others, not to say you're going to die, you're not going to die, but like who's got more of the risk factors because of
Yep.
the big data learning that we're having right now. It's an incredible opportunity, and it's moving so very fast. I just wanted to give a huge shout out to the early adopters in your study, the 140
Yes.
families who courageously started this. And I think there's going to start to be a feedback loop with the white paper and everybody
Hmm.
realizing the impact that this is going to have for
Yeah.
this living legacy that you alluded to, in the architects, the
Hmm.
co-designing architects
Yes.
of prevention and intervention.
Yes.
Thank you so much for all of that. What is one thing you want to make sure that our listeners do not miss from our conversation today?
Um, well, that the devices are loaned to us. We might hear the word donation, but it's a borrow. You absolutely get them back. And I think that's important for people to remember because sometimes that gets lost. And that it really does, for families, it can feel, I think, it can just feel such, like I said, just a meaning and purpose.
Mm.
It's not going to fix everything. It's not the answers to all their questions, but, we do come to a point in our grief, I think, where I'm never going to have all the pieces to put together to understand what happened with my brother. But if I can do something, if I had a device, I would, but if I can do something to impact this so another family doesn't have to go through what mine did, what yours did. And this may feel small, but when it's added with all of the others, it's a huge impact. And it is such a courageous thing to contribute your loved one's data. Even though it's de-identified, it's depersonalized, it's still their personal, it's their life. It's a snapshot of who they were. It's not the whole story. It doesn't tell the whole story, and it never could. But it is just incredibly important. And, the field has so much to learn, and it's in honor of them. We're so incredibly grateful. So,
So multiple contact questions.
yes.
So first, how do people get in touch with you if they want to talk to you more about this project?
So, me personally, right on the stopsoldiersuicide.org website, there is a black box project page, and there's a link in there. You can hop right on my calendar for a phone call or a Zoom meeting if you want to see my face. um,
Awesome.
Otherwise, my email it's just my name. So it's kim.burdett, Burditt, at stopsoldiersuicide.org, all one word.
And if people just want to go and check it out, go to the website and check it out, what's the best website to get them there?
Yeah, stopsoldiersuicide.org. And then, like I said, there's a Black Box Project page, and you can just learn lots there. There's some videos you can watch. There's some, FAQs or myths and facts about suicide and about the project, so you can learn a little bit there too.
Excellent. And if they
Yeah.
want to find the white paper, I know it's significant, just tell them exactly where to go one more time.
So stopsoldiersuicide.org. And actually, the white paper lives under our blog. So there's a blog on Stop Soldier Suicide's webpage, and you can see when it was released in August. But also easy, I could just email you that link. So if you want to
Yeah.
just email me and say, give me the link, and then I can send it to you. So
And I will put all of this in the show notes. So if people just want to go to the show notes and get
wonderful.
the links to all the things, that's where they'll all be housed. But sometimes people are
Awesome.
driving or walking their dogs. And
Yeah.
so we'll just give you all that information in a couple of different ways.
Awesome.
Kim, thank you so much for all of this.
Mm,
Thanks for leading it. Turning your pain into this purpose is impacting so many people. So
mm.
thank you.
It's an
Keep
honor.
going.
Thank you for having me. I
Yeah.
appreciate it so very much.
Yes. And thank you to our team behind the scenes here, making this come into your ears. That's a big shout out to Dave, our sound engineer who works magic, and Elias making our videos, and Chase and Stacy organizing me and all the things behind the scenes. Like many things, it takes a huge village to pull this all together. So thanks to all of you. And thanks to you listeners for making this a priority in your day, and to keep up in our game, all of us. I know together we'll do better and better. So in closing, open your heart, challenge your thinking, and take action to save lives.
Mm.
Together, we can restore dignity and sustain a passion for living.